Before I say this, please take everything I say with a big, lighthearted grain of salt. Not serious, just a little jokey joke, okay? Okay, just between you and me, nobody else is listening, okay? Was the Beatles 1964 documentary kind of meh? So that was filmed before I saw the documentary, and I was operating under the assumption, and I don't usually do this, that this documentary might be disappointing. I try my best to not get spoiled on other Beatles stuff. I do not watch Beatles creators. I don't know who most Beatles creators are. I stay in my own lane when I'm watching YouTube, listening to podcasts. That's for my enjoyment. So I don't watch other stuff. But after the 1964 Beatles doc came out on Disney Plus, I couldn't escape the criticism I was seeing. And I am so happy to report that I loved it. Wait. I am conflicted and a little confused, miffed, bitey about a lot of the criticism I've seen. Media literacy might just be so dead. And it's like, come on, guys. But I'm gonna let past Lars do annoying memos, do some other intro stuff, and then we'll get into it. So take it away, past Lars. Take it away, Aaron.
Yeah, take it away, Aaron.
Hi, I'm Lars, and this is my land. In my land, I get to do pretty much whatever I want. So today, we're going to talk about the Beatles' 1964 documentary, and you're going to listen, because it's my land. Welcome to Annoying Memos Land. Beepity beep beepity beep beep. If you're new here, what happens is I waste my journalism degree and the awards I won doing that by making long form videos on the Beatles and TV and movies. In fact, I made a 7-hour video on the TV show Lost that if I don't mention it every video I do, my sibling will leave me, albeit hesitantly, in the snow to be killed by skeleton warriors, which is a pretty embarrassing way to go out. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That helps out so much, and only like 20% of you are subscribed, which is embarrassing for me and hurtful to my narcissistic personality disorder. Something that someone just told me after commenting something very positive on my Ruddles video, they came back to say, I'm unfollowing you because of your narcissistic personality disorder. I have to say, thanks for believing the lie that I actually like myself. So please like, subscribe, and comment, and make me feel better because that actually really hurt my feelings. If you're cool as hell, you can support me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Larsland, where I have more than 20 hours of extra stuff, director's cuts, semi-weekly song breakdowns of the Beatles where we dig deep and I get to say stuff that I don't get to say here and play music that I'm not allowed to have here. Definitely consider doing that, but more importantly, like, subscribe, comment if you're nasty, or if you want to make me feel better about my narcissistic personality disorder that I... You guys realize that, like, the YouTubers are, like, people, right? Like, we're people, okay? All right, let's go back to my land.
Talk. Who's talking?
By the way, I'm extremely ill. I've been extremely ill. I have an autoimmune disorder. For the last 4 months, I've been on and off sick. It's been overwhelming, exhausting, a little concerning at this point. But the last 9 days, I've been flu sick. I'm on antibiotics. I got Dayquil, Delsum, Tylenol, Dymista, not all at the same time. This is a carefully curated situation under the advice of a medical professional, but we're dealing with it and we're not getting better, and it's something. So I ask for your grace and your love while we get through this. 23 days. 2 rounds of antibiotics, so many bananas, so much yogurt, finally feeling better. Finally feeling better. Still a little sniffly, but better. Anything is better.
I like anything that's original.
I really don't want you guys to skip off, okay? So Past Lars is going to give you press release information, kind of like an overview of this documentary. Then I'm going to give you kind of an intro of the documentary itself. And then we're going to go into some themes and what I believe made this documentary incredibly special and poignant in a way that I don't think we've seen, and maybe we really should explore in a packaged deal like this.
When I say this is a new take, what I mean is it's a reframing of, or just kind of a recompilation of a lot of common Beatles stories that we've already seen. We all know these things. We know about the JFK assassination. We know about the civil rights movement. I mean, you should know about it. I've seen this documentary a lot now. It's December 12th. It's been out for almost 2 weeks. And for, about 10 days, I've been watching this thing on and off through medicated haze. And I like it a lot. I do. It is kind of like baby's first Beatles documentary for Americans. Is this a very specific disclaimer qualifier to my reaction to this documentary for the rest of the video? Absolutely. None of this is new. None of this is some earth-shattering information for Beatles fans or anyone, really. But altogether, it is very fun. And as a Beatles fan, it's always good to have something new to watch. So I don't think it sucks. I don't think it's meh. For the bulk of this video, I'm extremely positive. And then at the end, I come back in with some more, criticisms or whatever. So before you get all comedy, can you just wait until the end of the video to shit on me? And then you can shit on me, because I know you will. I know you will, because of my narcissistic personality disorder. Basically, whenever I say, this is a new take, or this is a bit, remember me. Remember me. Remember what I'm saying is, it's a repackaging. It's a good primer in an hour and 47 minutes. A repackaging of the situation, of the impact that the Beatles became on the world, specifically the US. Okay?
So I know that this might be a little meandering, but remember, I'm on 83 types of medications. That is my alarm. Antibiotics have no business being this big. That's insane. That's insane. I don't even know what kind of drug-filled haze. Honestly, Dayquil does something weird to me, but it is keeping me from coughing. So just, can you bear with me for this one? Give me a pity, like, and subscribe and comment, because I am an ill little bitch.
Everyone needed to be a Beatle, so they had to have a Beatle wig.
I don't know if you know this. Being sick is boring. Being sick is so boring. And everybody else in the world has watched this documentary. And I've been trying my best to not get into spoilers, but it is hard because I see all these people that are my friends on Blue Sky and stuff doing a group watch together and reacting together. And I've been trying to ignore everything. And that is why I came up with that initial question. Was it meh? Because what I've seen and tried to scroll past was there's a lot of claims in the marketing. And sometimes that's the thing, that a product isn't bad at all. And by the way, there was so much work that went behind this documentary. So don't get upset yet, please, because there was so much work that went behind this documentary. Sometimes it's the marketing, never before seen, unused footage from the vault, all that kind of stuff, that when you're marketing these kinds of things, diehard Beatles fans will get excited to see something that they've never seen before. And a lot of us, if you're here, you're one of them. A lot of us have seen a lot of stuff. We've spent a lot of time just wasting hours watching the same things, silent arrival footage at some hotel in Denmark. So finding unseen footage, especially when it's been restored to 4K, pretty big ask, pretty exciting thing. So is it meh? Almost guarantee it's not, because anything with the Beatles and it makes me extremely happy. So it will make you extremely happy. But was it advertised properly? I mean, you got to get people to watch. Why am I being such a hater? Is it just because I'm sick, or is it because I have narcissistic personality disorder? Before we watch, there's a couple of things. One, most importantly, is that with copyrighted music, I can only play 3 to 5 seconds of copyrighted music on YouTube. With TV movies, I can usually play 18 seconds sometimes. But when it's Beatles stuff, it is stuck back to the 3 to 5 seconds. So whenever I play something from anthology, something from anything, I have to really pad out the time. There probably won't be very much of the documentary that makes it into this final cut, and I'm so sorry. I will have a full watch through available on my Patreon and a longer version of this available on my Patreon, but I probably won't be able to do as much as I'd want to. So I'll do my best to show the examples of what I wanted to talk about, but my hands are generally tied and it's not up to me. Let's do a quick little breakdown of the documentary. This information comes from the press release that came with the documentary. This was announced October 14th this year that Martin Scorsese produced a 1964 documentary that documents the trip of the Beatles going to the US for the first time in 1964. It says that there will be rare footage restored to 4K by Park Road Post in New Zealand. This rare footage comes from documentarians Albert and David Maysles, who followed the Beatles during their 1964 February trip to the US. And there's been lots of discussion over the years about how much of the Maysles footage has been, kind of swept aside, hidden, lost, forgotten, throughout the years. So seeing the word rare in the original press release seemed like a promise, and we will talk about that. That the audio was demixed by Wingnut Studios, that's Peter Jackson Studios, and remixed by Giles Martin. It features new Paul and Ringo interviews, plus fans, some celebrities, and more, recollecting and reminiscing over the time. Beatles 64 is directed by David Tedeschi and produced by Martin Scorsese, Margaret Bodie, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Olivia Harrison, Sean Ono Lennon, Jonathan Clyde, Michaela Beardsley, with Jeff Jones and Rick Yorn serving as executive producers. Coinciding with the film's Disney Plus release, 7 American Beatles albums have been analog cut for 180-gram audiophile vinyl from their original mono master tape for global release on November 22nd by Apple Corps Limited /Capital/UME. Originally compiled for U.S. release between January 1964 and March 1965 by Capitol Records and United Artists, these mono albums have been out of print on vinyl since 1995. Meet the Beatles' second album, A Hard Day's Night, original motion picture soundtrack, Something New, The Beatles Stories, 2 LPs, Beatles 65, and the early Beatles are available now they're available now to purchase in a box set called The Beatles 1964 US Albums in Mono, with 6 of the titles also available individually. So for the Beatles collectors, you guys are eating good and you're spending a lot. Ka-ching! We're gonna watch this. We're gonna react to it. We're gonna see how it goes. I'm going to enjoy it and my narcissistic personality disorder. I'm too sick to exist right now. I'm wearing 8,000 pounds of makeup just to look alive. Like I just covered, the marketing can make or break Beatles fans' expectations. So now that I've seen the documentary and I've watched it a couple times and I've grasped how I feel about it, the Beatles fandom is so far-reaching and varying in breadth and depth. It is impossible to manage expectations of us all. First and foremost, the Beatles, as they are now, are a business, okay? It's a business run by Apple, Paul, Ringo, Olivia, and Yoko. It is about the bottom line for them. We can predict releases by the year based on anniversaries. So now that we're looking at the 1964 documentary, the Eye of the Storm book and exhibit by Paul makes more sense. Paul is interviewed at one of the exhibits in Brooklyn for this documentary. It's all a preview for this. They're all a preview for each other. This documentary is a preview for the 1964 vinyl releases. They all feed into each other. Okay, good or bad, whatever, it is what it is. I'm pretty neutral on it. That's not a criticism or anything. It's what makes sense, okay? I'm personally pulling for a 2025 anthology re-release. I would love that. I mean, God, I have been so good. I asked for so little. What do I need to do to get an anthology re-release?
Oh, hello, yes, who do you want? Quick, speak up. It's me, you know me.
By the way, I have, rather than resting bitch face, which I do have, but when I'm watching something, I have like resting dread face, resting concern face. I think Ariana Grande said something very perfect about it recently.
The thing is, Stephanie, I can tell when she's telling the truth because she gets the look of concern on her face.
You know how people have resting bitch face?
Yes,
I have resting constant fret.
But my face is always like, and I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't know how to make myself look decent. When I first saw that this 1964 documentary was coming out, I admittedly eye rolled it. I was like, God, we have had so much coverage on this damn year. What else do we need to know about the Beatles in 1964? I'm over it. I'm done. We've seen a lot of it. Now, when I realized that it was just for that first US trip, I was a little bit more intrigued because I think that if you focus the scope on one subject, it can really bring about some interesting takes and something can become really special. Who'd have thunk that I believe focusing on one topic in particular and diving into it makes it interesting? That has nothing to do with my brand. Now, this documentary is really a view into Beatlemania in the US, but there's more depth as well. It examines the American spirit in February 1964. JFK was assassinated November 23rd, 1963, and that impacted the American life. And it changed things permanently, I would say. In some ways it's still echoed today, but certainly back then, for sure, for the entirety of the 60s, especially after Bobby was killed. This is another special interest of mine, the Kennedy family. It impacted things. That is a part of the discussion in this documentary. It also gets into race impact, and interestingly enough, a little bit of the competitiveness between the UK press and the US press. What this documentary is not is a showcase of the Sullivan Show concerts. There's not a ton of music. So if that's what you want, it's not what you're getting. Just throw away that expectation. If you wanted full-blown remastered audio of all of those concerts, it's not happening, Betty. Like, we get a couple of the songs from each show. That's what it is. That's all, Buster. But, so throw away that. And if you want an hour and 47 minutes of unseen Maisels footage scaled up to 4K, it's not what you're getting. So throw away that expectation as well. What you are getting is a bit of a reframing of the original US Beatlemania. This documentary, frankly, might be a bit of a rub for the OG Beatle fans. They already know this shit. They lived this shit. Some of you guys weren't there. And you're like, I don't need to hear about erotic George Harrison dream. I had my own erotic George Harrison dream. Real suction.
I dreamed that I was at a dinner table and George looked over and noticed that I was wearing a bra.
I'm so uncomfortable right now. Oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable right now. There's something, so a lot of people have like sexual romantic attraction to the Beatles. They're very attractive people. I don't. I couldn't tell you why. I just don't.
He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. And when I wrote down this dream, I wrote, but real suction, because he was so proud of me that I was wearing a bra.
I want to fucking die. No, like, there's nothing wrong with her telling the story. I'm just like, I'm easily icked, I guess. They don't need this, so I could see why it's like, okay. But for us younger generations, the ones who are unable to really grasp the environment, born decades too late, if accepted in good faith, this is kind of a new take. And we do get regurgitations of interviews that we know and love, that overseen, overplayed press conference with the Pan Am behind them. We've seen it. Oh no, we're not Elvis. We're not Elvis. We aren't.
Psychiatrist recently said there's nothing but 4 Elvis Presleys.
Oh, it's not true. It's not true.
We can't sing without money. If we knew what made us special, we'd be managers.
Why does it excite them so much?
We don't know, really. If we knew, we'd form another group and be managers.
We've all seen it. We all know it. We all love it. We see it again. I think maybe once again, I think past Lars said this, but like for the Beatles fanatics, we've seen this shit so many times that it's kind of like, good God. But the people who are kind of new to the Beatles, let's let the newbies get excited about some of this stuff. They may have never seen it in such good quality, and maybe some of them haven't seen it at all. People my age are having kids. People my age that are into the Beatles are having little babies. They're having nieces and nephews. They want to show this new generation, Gen Alpha and whatever. I don't know the next one. The Beatles. Let's have the introductory. Sometimes we have to start shallow to get deep. Okay, so let's give it a little bit of grace. There's limited bits from George interviews. There's tragically more so limited bits from old John interviews. Paul is able to reminisce in the exhibit. Ringo is able to show us his old costumes and his old touring drumming kit. They're telling us those old stories that we've heard a lot, but in a bit of a different element. You know, we're hearing the yes, yes, yes story from Paul.
And my dad was in the other room, so he came in to play it to him. And at the end of it, he said, "It's very nice, but couldn't you sing She Loves You? Yes, yes, yes."
You think he gets sick of telling the same goddamn stories over and over again? I know he doesn't. We're hearing Ringo talking about wanting to be one with the band.
You know, if anything goes wrong, watch any band, if anything goes wrong, they go. They all blame the drummer.
We've heard it before, but it is always fun to see it again. We hear from fans talking about their experiences, but we also hear from icons. So we're hearing from people who mean a lot to us, such as Ronnie Spector, Smokey Robinson, Little Richard, old interviews, Ron Isley talking about how the Beatles meant a lot to them, which I found incredible. Particularly the Smokey Robinson interview was extremely moving to me.
I remember the first time I heard the Beatles because I heard the Beatles before they were the Beatles, you know. The Miracles and I were performing.
I'm gonna cry. There are, of course, the disappointed and angry adults, the outlandish and outraged news coverage. There's this one guy who calls the fans sick and quite illiterate and says that they only care about the Beatles for sexual reasons, which may or may not be true. He says he finds the whole thing quite frightening and quite sick.
To me, they're all obviously lower middle class, highly illiterate, unintelligent, wild kids. I think there's something very strange about it at the same time, something very sick. I don't know exactly what the reason is. I'm sure that sexual reasons have something to do with it. I think the whole thing's a little bit frightening and quite sick.
Now, I want to get into some of the sub-stories of the documentary. The themes of this documentary are what make it really special. So we start with the general introduction, what's going on in the US, JFK assassination, space race, that kind of stuff, the American spirit, and then the Beatles themselves, their music, they land, and then the documentary really opens with an old fan, Joe Queenan, a writer, and he talks about the first time he heard I Want to Hold Your Hand in December 1963, and he starts crying. And for me, a crier, it's a visceral moment. It's incredibly touching.
December of '63, my sister had the radio on, and I heard She Loves You.
Dude, it's so real. It's real now. Like, I don't know how it was then, but that is real. It's real now.
It's like the light came on.
Yes, absolutely. He's extremely quotable. He said that it's like the lights came on. So it makes sense that the documentary ends with this guy. Like, he is so clearly a writer. I need to get a documentary. No, I need to get a fucking cough drop. I'll be right back. Ludens. It went down my shirt. This is what we're dealing with now. And while that's really visceral, we also get to see some of the fans talk about the merch, the collecting, the ephemera. Fans bringing out the wigs, still wrapped, dresses that they did not wear, all kinds of stuff that is still in the original packaging. It is so endearing, and it brings a connection from the fans at home to these original Beatlemaniacs, because I experienced something similar.
I should say my room is nothing but Beatles. Beatle pictures. They should have Beatle wallpaper. That's all I have on my wall.
I love this because I felt like this when I first got into the Beatles too. I still feel like this, but like the urge to have everything Beatles around you. I have 50 something books, you know, like 52, 53 books, physical book. I have some more like ebooks or whatever. You want to have Beatle bookmarks and Beatle books and Beatle notebooks and Beatle posters and all this stuff. I don't have Beatle posters. Like, I would have more if I had more money. Beatle shirts. They want Beatle dolls. You want everything Beatle all the time, everywhere. Beatle book. This computer is on the TuneIn extended version as a monitor stand. 3 Beatle books, more Beatle books. Also, lyrics. Have to use that for song breakdowns. He's got several White Album songs in here. Just gotta have all your Beatle books. Oh, wait, no, that's not my Beatle bookmark. That's a badass bookmark, though. I don't know where my Beatle bookmarks are. I remember getting them, bragging about them in my first Beatle video and being like, do you have 4 Beatle books or 6 Beatle bookmarks? Like, as a joke, I was like, have you seen all these documentaries? Do you own a Beatle shirt? Like, joking. People took that extremely seriously. They thought that I was special, you know, because of my narcissistic personality disorder. But here's one. Here's 2, actually. I don't even use them. The hysteria is so real for Beatle fans today. Just being able to go see one hand clapping in theaters, I cried. And now I am an emotional bitch. It's like kind of my shtick, but I got emotional just being able to see it. And now that was not scaled up to 4K. That is a rough watch. And I've never been like a merch ephemera person because honestly I'm broke, but also you know, there was only one band other than the Beatles that I felt the need to buy stuff for, keep tickets, blah, blah, blah. When I got into this band, they were broken up, and at the time, we thought they were broken up forever. Now, as most musicians do, and I'm not going to name the band because they're from my town, so if I mention it, it would kind of dox me. But I remember the drummer came in for a different show at a record store I was at. And when I saw him, I looked at my partner and I was like, oh my God, there he is. That's the drummer. And he's not even the creative mind behind the music of this band. And my partner, who had seen this band from the beginning on a different label before they were named what they were, my partner was like, yeah, that's the drummer, like whatever. But for me, I was like, oh my God. You know, I was like so excited, so overwhelmed. And it was just like this memorable moment for me. So seeing these fans waiting outside the Plaza Hotel in New York, excited just to see who might be related to the Beatles entourage, trying to break in. These boys out there saying, we know who these people are. We know the Beatles. These girls break in and they say that they know Brian.
No, I'm sorry, that's all. You can't go any further than here. Are you registered in the hotel? What room?
117. Just lie. Sis, just lie.
Well, get it out of there fast.
It is incredible and it is so understandable. Some lady says she doesn't understand the crying and the screaming now, like looking back, but back then during Beatlemania, it seemed natural. Well, I understand the crying and screaming now. I get it. I get emotional just watching them. There's like a big train footage reel during kind of the last act of this documentary. And I got really emotional just watching them be there and so full of life and so vibrant. It was just really watching it from my own desk made me extremely emotional. I mean, I don't know, you know. When Ronnie Spector comes to speak about her experience with the Beatles, she talks about how the Beatles were asking what these groups do on stage. They wanted to know everything, and it was all about the black music, the black groups.
They wanted to know everything about America, the food, the groups, the dancing. They asked us everything about Little Richard, Chuck Berry, the Marvelettes.
And she sneaks them out and they go to Harlem and the boys are not recognized there and they were able to just be themselves for a minute. But they wanted to know everything about US culture. And it was kind of a culture shock. The immediacy of understanding UK versus US is not something that existed in 1964 the way it does in 2024. I think we need to stop and remember how different the world was then. Keep that in mind. And the culture shock, they're being interviewed by BBC reporters over the phone, being asked, what is it like there? And John is saying, they're crazy here. They're absolutely wild. Maybe it's just a first impression.
What are your first impressions of arrival in America?
They're wild. They're all wild. They just seem to go.
Wilder than they are here in England?
Well, it seemed like it. Maybe it's just the first impression.
But there's Murray the K, who's there. He's snuck into the room. He spent the whole trip with them, being, the fifth Beatle.
He kind of barged in the room and and then he was kind of hung out with us for the entire trip. Funny, really. I never quite understood how he did that.
He has such a big footprint on the Beatles' success or dissemination in the U.S., and you really do see it in this documentary. I don't think he has a lack of credit, but it is good for the newer, younger Beatles fans to see him, to understand his presence, because when I was not even that early into my Beatles fandom, I didn't understand his impact. So it's important. I do see some competitiveness between the UK and the US media, particularly in this one interview where a UK reporter is kind of poking fun at a US reporter and saying, like, do we get you more? Do we understand you more?
But he wasn't really with it. I mean, he asked you, what was your favourite number? And you said White Christmas.
What's your favourite song?
White Christmas.
It's a good song.
Rock and roll.
Christmas.
Oh, yeah, it is, yeah.
That's how it goes, that's the only way we can get on that. So.
Yeah. You see, the British reporters are a bit sharper.
And that possessiveness of the Beatles continues to this day. And I think that's one of the reasons why my comment section can be so defensive, bitey, correcty, sometimes cruel, because we're all so passionate about the Beatles that it's almost like you couldn't possibly understand them the way that I understand them. Lars Land, you've only been into the Beatles since April 2022. Do you even deserve the platform and attention that you get because you haven't put in the work? And, maybe I don't, but the Beatles aren't for one of us alone or one group alone or one generation alone. It's for all of us to rip that away from one person, one platform, one whatever is a crying shame. And to devalue someone's fandom is to keep the Beatles' impact from growing and continuing, enduring. And we shouldn't do that, because one ongoing theme in this documentary is the power of music and how much it can impact you. David Lynch comes on and says, music is like air, it's like fire, it's like wind, it's like earth. Music is its own thing, its own communicator. It's this string that connects us all and changes us all. And
a certain kind of music can swell the heart till it almost bursts. Tears of happiness flow out of your eyes. You can't believe the beauty that comes.
He was really into Elvis, so when he got to see the DC show at the Coliseum, he was just completely overwhelmed. He didn't really understand the scope of what he was getting himself into, and he said it was a life-changing experience. One thing about the Beatles that made them so different, so life-changing, was not only the sexuality and their appeal to the young girls and the young guys. Like, let's throw the homophobia out of here. There's no room for that shit here. No room for homophobia, transphobia here. Sexuality and understanding is something that the Beatles were able to bring to that generation and continue to do so. And we see people talk in a scholastic way about how the Beatles kind of had a softness to them.
Anybody to prove anything, I can be tender and I can be sensitive and I can be compassionate and I can even cry. And I am a man and I am my own man. And that man who is strong enough to be gentle.
They weren't so othering of women, men. It was very direct.
The whole notion of male versus female is not prominent. They don't emphasize the masculine versus the feminine at all. It's very inclusive in some way.
Something that Paul, John, they all say is that those early songs were direct to the fans. From me to you. I want to hold your hand. Love me, do.
I think a lot of the fun we had making the songs and the records communicates itself.
It's very direct. It's very like, I love you, and creating that sort of connection. And that directness, that vulnerability brought about something in the fans that they didn't have with previous acts in the same way that they had with the Beatles. But let's not forget the legitimate mania, the beat, the heart of their music comes from original rock and roll, beneath that Motown, beneath that jazz. Black music.
They were playing music you were familiar with, but they played it as the Beatles or like the Beatles.
The Beatles praised black music. These were their idols. They said that openly, spoke that openly. Something that Smokey Robinson said was that it wasn't lost on him that the Beatles were openly praising black music, but something that Ron Isley said was he did wonder, like, why can the Beatles do these shows and we can't?
Paul McCartney would often say, if it wasn't for the Isley brothers, we would still be in Liverpool. We were kind of wondering why couldn't we be on some of the shows that they were on. Well, we should have been on that show doing it, you know.
You know, that's disgusting. Like, he didn't say that's disgusting, but I'm saying that's disgusting, and we know why. We know why. They were the wrong color. It's great and it's noteworthy that the Beatles were not afraid to give credit where credit's due.
The first white artist ever of their magnitude say, yeah, we grew up listening to black music. We love Motown. No other white artist had ever said that. Not anyone of magnitude until the Beatles said that.
Now, are they some white heroes? No, of course not. Let's not get carried away. But they weren't shy about where their credit, where their ties, their heartbeat came from, and that was from what Paul says in this interview, American colored groups. That was the terminology at that point, but black music.
Can I just ask you one final question each? You are the idols of so many people in this business. Do you have any idols yourself?
American colored groups, mainly. Yeah, I agree with that.
You know, hearing from these aforementioned legends in the blatant conversation surrounding segregated shows is a nice reminder of what the world was facing in the 60s. It's not like it is now.
The saving grace was the music, because it gave those kids a common love. We play these big arenas, and there'll be a rope down the center of the arena. White kids on one side, black kids on the other side. And after they start hearing the music, and we go down there a year later, you see white boys with black girlfriends, and black boys with white girlfriends, and they were all dancing together. And music is the international language. It's the barrier breaker.
Yes, activism has come a long way. You know, we've had some backsliding in some recent years. I just felt that it's really important in this documentary that they do spend so much time hearing from the black musicians. We do hear from white folks. David Lynch, like I said, you know, famous director, Twin Peaks, Mulholland Drive, you know, a bunch of other disturbing shit that has shaped our world. David Lynch also, he works with the Beatles. He's done interviews with them regarding meditation. He's been kind of ingratiated into this world. And we hear from white writers. We hear from scholars and everything. So it's not like, it's a good mix of people. One guy, Sananda, I don't know how to say his last name, but he talks about not being allowed to listen to the Beatles, but because he was only allowed to listen to gospel music growing up.
I wasn't allowed to listen to any music in the house that wasn't gospel music.
I feel you, bud.
Or considered acceptable music.
But it didn't matter. No matter how much this stuff was like not allowed at home, it permeated the walls. It permeated the rules. You couldn't get away from the Beatles. It was such a force. Beatlemania, it was so pervasive that it was interesting to see. And I can't forget, there are two different photos. I'm going to put them up here. There's one of Paul in 64 and there's one of Paul in 68. And I love this comparison because, and I used it not to say like, cause I kind of hate myself right now. When Chapel Run was getting so much shit earlier, like a couple months ago, about speaking out against fans being fans, like haters being so insane and so over the top and crossing boundaries. I just wanted to reiterate that the original crazy fans, from the Beatles, it is clear that the Beatles suffered trauma, and then also Paul becomes so desensitized to it. They're just touching his hair. And I'm just thinking, you know, I remember when I was early in this, I had like 600 subscribers, and someone found my personal Facebook, and someone found my personal email, and someone found my personal Instagram. And I remember feeling so disturbed and violated. I think about that now, and I'm like, well, yeah, I was tiny, so that's probably why I was disturbed and violated. But there's this scene in this documentary where they're driving away, and we've all seen this scene. Like, if you're here, you've seen this scene where they're all just surrounded by fans, and then this one guy, he's recording them, filming them, and running along the car. And that's not a big deal now, but it's so creepy then. I mean, it's crazy, but it's like so creepy, you know? The boys couldn't even just sit there and talk about what they're gonna order for lunch, and obviously the audio and stuff, but like they didn't have a damn moment in peace. And that's why the ongoing story of the Beatles getting their moment of peace was them hiding in the bathroom in the Plaza Hotel. They spent most of their time together. I'm not crying, my voice, it's my voice. Most of their time, most of their comfort together in the bathroom away from everyone, because, you know, they still had fans sneaking into the hotels. They had fans lying and sneaking around. Even reporters saying, well, they didn't leave, you know, there was misdirection. They said that the Beatles had left. They haven't left, they're still down there. So the girls are running and trying to catch up.
Where are they? Down there?
Yeah, they're down there.
Still down there. You're serious?
They're still there, I'm not kidding you.
They're right down there? Yeah. Come on, let's go. Oh,
these boys had no privacy. I know that that's something we talk about, but just stop and think about it. The boys are on the train. They're traveling, I think, from DC to Miami. We don't know for sure. And they're kind of getting bits of goofball stuff for the Maisels films. Everybody's joking around, but Paul, who I think is the most genial in general still to this day regarding Beatlemania, he's always willing to put on a face. He says, I don't even have a sense of humor right now. Now, we don't know what caused. Where the hell? There's Paul. I was going to say, where the hell is Paul during all of this? He's all the way back here. He's not getting any camera time. For once, Paul is over it. He's like, oh my God.
I'm not in a laughing mood even.
Him to not have a sense of humor right now. But I took that to mean he's just exhausted. The boy is tired. And he needs his space. I just realized I don't have the lighting all the way turned on. Do I still look good? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. Oh my God, I don't. I know I don't. Don't answer it. Sorry, shouldn't have asked. It's my narcissistic personality disorder energy. I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna go get another cough drop. In case you're wondering, the best cough drops for losing your voice, for your throat, are the Ludens. I use the sugar-free because I have to use these whether I'm sick or not when I'm filming. And the best ones for the cough are these Ricola ones, the rectangle ones, okay? But the voice ones, I have damaged vocal cords. That's like part of the Lars Lord's true. So I have to use these anyway for the big films. One thing I found interesting about the Beatlemania subject was when the boys went to visit the British embassy, this was one of the more violent and violating moments of this tour because or mini tour, whatever, trip, whatever you want to call it. Because this is where Ringo had his hair cut. This is where you look at this part. This guy is just reaching into Paul's pocket from behind him. They're just pawing at them. And John was so disturbed by the whole scene that he just walked out.
Somebody animal cut Ringo's hair, you know, in the middle of. I walked out of that swearing at all of them, and I just left in the middle of it.
It's interesting to me because Ringo, I think this is just an assumption, and you know, from what I see in general, that he's the least favorite Beatle. Like, he's the least swooned after one, but he's the one who got the most mauled.
I lost in all those days of madnesses was half of my scalp, a shirt, and a gold necklace. Wales was the worst place I ever went.
What were they after?
They were after my head.
And the Brits were calling them names, according to a photographer, Benson, I think. I can't remember the names, guys, sorry. Remember, I'm sick. He says that they were being called names, and George was near in tears. And then
they were calling them scruff, and the Beatles were in shock about it. some of the staff would call them yobbles and say disrespectful remarks. That George Harrison was near tears.
Cuts to Paul saying, we didn't give a fuck.
You know what? We didn't give a flying fuck.
I don't know if George was near in tears or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were just moments of them being emotionally overwhelmed or just upset, maybe because Ringo had just been literally assaulted. That's assault, by the way. That's not just some crazy fan behavior. Cutting someone's hair, that's a crime.
I was kind of skeptical about this, and I'm still a little like near in tears because it just seems different for George. But then again, just like I said about Paul, he was probably exhausted, and it's, I'm sure, upsetting to see yourself, but also your three best friends be treated poorly. And maybe you were hoping that the UK embassy would feel a little bit more like home when you've been sick and away and mobbed for the last several days.
I think my soul with this documentary was this story from Jack Douglas, who's a music producer who was intrigued by the Beatles, and he and his friend go over to Liverpool as New Yorkers, and they kind of sneak into Liverpool, but immigration winds up kicking them out. But they got in the newspaper while they were there. They took over the headlines. Later on, Jack Douglas was editing and then engineering on the, I think, Imagine album with John, so we had kind of a serendipitous meeting with John. As far as the documentary goes, I think someone else more. But it does add to the documentary because it shows that these guys wanted so badly to be like the Beatles, to see what was happening in Liverpool, because so many bands are coming out of Liverpool at this point that are impacting the history and culture of music. They wanted to go there, see the Cavern Club. They wanted to know these people, and they wanted to get their hands on whatever this magic was. So it does give to the documentary, but I do think it was probably the weakest part. The documentary wraps up kind of by saying and reiterating that at this point, it had only been, 2.5 months since JFK was assassinated. That was such a shocking moment in time. It was televised. It was well documented. It was piped into everyone's living rooms. This is different than it had ever been before. And so America was in a dark moment. They also do, now that I'm just remembering it, the Beatles, there is a conversation about the Beatles being the first generation in the UK that didn't have conscription of military. They were able to be the first generation to live without having to go to war, and there's that conversation. But you could tell that they had a harder time weaving that into the story, even though I think it is important. I'm also having a hard time weaving it into the story, but maybe that's just me. The JFK assassination really put a damper on things in the US, and America was hurting. Paul said maybe at that point, America needed something like the Beatles, needed some joy, needed a rallying moment to kind of start healing.
When we came, America had been in mourning. It was quite shortly after Kennedy had been assassinated. Maybe America needed something like the Beatles to lift it out of mourning and just sort of say life goes on. The joy you see in these audiences is like they're being lifted out of sorrow.
And so the documentary wraps up again with the writer Joe Queenan, and he says that his dad was an alcoholic, an abusive alcoholic, and he never got past the JFK assassination, but music is healing and it stops the bleeding. He is so eloquent. It's just absolutely about the impact of the Beatles during this trip and during 1964.
Van Morrison always talks about music as healing. That's what music does. It stops the bleeding. My father never recovered from Kennedy's assassination, but we did.
I think it's absolutely worth a watch. Once again, The Beatles 64 is available on Disney+. Hopefully, maybe when they put out a DVD version of it, maybe we'll see more of the Sullivan shows. But I think it's worth a watch with an open mind and an open heart to see a little bit of a reframing of that situation. So I had a great time watching it. I'm looking forward to watching it again. And yeah, that's all I really have to say.
So shocking and out of character, I have extra thoughts. So, new outro. To be specific, if we're going to be nitpicky, it actually ends with an interview from John saying that the Beatles weren't these philosophers, or they weren't so ahead of their time. They were in a crow's nest of a ship, and they kind of saw the way that things were going. They saw the trend and they pointed it out, and they kind of got there first, but they weren't, some prophets of the future of music.
The thing I didn't like was the insistence that we led something. So my picture of it now is there was a ship going to discover the new world, and the Beatles were in the crow's nest, and we just said, land ho.
It's interesting because in the documentary, there is a point where Paul says, this isn't culture, this is just a good laugh. And I think especially during this America trip, the Beatles weren't aware of what they were walking into. And this trip starts the questions of what will you do when this success is over? What will you do when the bubble bursts? Was kind of the terminology. And it became a joke, but the Beatles were thinking, this is a short-term situation. This isn't the rest of our lives. They definitely didn't expect it to become what it was, because this had been a couple crazy years in the UK being famous. This was some crazy trip at first, but they didn't expect it to go on for 10 years of the Beatles and then, decades and decades of being musicians and actors and famous people, et cetera, et cetera. How could you possibly know what you're coming up against? I said that this was my sole gripe.
I think my sole, was this story from Jack Douglas,
and but I want to mention that these interviews with John are extremely poignant, extremely good. They're mostly from the same interview where he's saying a lot of very good, well-balanced things. He's not always this balanced, but mainly the George interviews are from the Aspel & Co. interview with Ringo from 1988, where they make the whales joke, and then a couple of anthology interviews. George is very quotable, and he's got a lot to say, but throughout this documentary, which I've seen 7 times now, he talks about how during the Sullivan Show, there was no reported crime, how the band themselves were kind of normal and everyone around them was crazy, how the Beatles were funny, and a few other things. But he doesn't have a lot of meat and potatoes toward actual commentary regarding their trip there, which is interesting because George usually has a lot to say. The quiet Beatle is not very quiet. So I was ultimately kind of disappointed. The more I watched this, the more I was disappointed with the clips that they used for George, and a little bit disappointed with some of the stuff from Ringo and Paul. I kind of just wish people would pull some different anecdotes from Paul. My God. I don't think Ringo answers a lot of different questions, but I don't think people ask him very interesting questions. I'm sure you could get something more interesting out of Paul, but he's going to tell you these same kind of rehearsed answers that he always has. One thing that I neglected to mention, he was asked this question that he regularly has to answer, but he's become more and more candid over the years. What would you say to John and George if you were able to speak to them today? And he said that he would tell them that he loved them.
What would you say to John or to George if they were here today?
I would say I love you, because growing up in Liverpool, you never said that. You never told a guy you loved him, unless he was like your brother or something. And they were brothers.
And that always touches me. And I think, you live and you learn and you have lots of regrets. And I think it's clear that Paul clearly has quite a few regrets in the way that some of those things went down. And the love he has for those boys has continued to grow and mature and bloom over the years. And I think that their spirits know that. But it's great that he is willing to share that with the world, because it gives us some sense of closure, which is dumb, but it's true. My biggest gripe with this, and this is just me, is that chronologically, this documentary is all over the place because the dates are not anywhere on the video. Maybe I'm just spoiled because of Get Back, which gives us the exact calendar date, the plan. When things change, we all know exactly where it's going, and God knows I like to be fucking insane like that, but we don't know anything. We don't know the day that they land. We know that they're staying at the Plaza Hotel, but we don't know exactly when the Sullivan shows are. In some interviews, we know, okay, they have their first Sullivan show, and then they have a taped show, and then they have a DC show, and then they have a Miami show. But even then, I don't know how much it flashes this information on screen. And there's interspersed news coverage, interviews with fans, and I understand that can't all be chronological, but then at kind of near the end of the documentary, there's an interview with a promoter, name is escaping me. Like I said before, 2 rounds of antibiotics, 23 days of being ill. I lost probably 25% of my brain. I am broken now, okay? That promoter interview talking about how he was treated by the Carnegie Hall staff, even though he was booking really popular acts, was extremely interesting. And it was just kind of like sandwiched in there in a weird spot. I was kind of like, why is this particularly here? Because the Carnegie Hall shows were the beginning of the Sullivan show. So why isn't that up there? It was just confusing to me. Just the lack of chronological explanation just bothered me. That's just a nitpick. That's a personal problem. That's on me, okay? I'm aware. The importance of watching the Sullivan Show or being able to see the shows when they aired was a fun little tidbit. So we get to see a family watch, the Gonzalez family, watch the broadcast. Jamie Bernstein talks about watching it because it was going on during dinner time and they wheeled the TV into dinner and watched it there. And Joe Queenan talks about how he had an uncle that was more understanding with the kids and they got to watch over there because his dad was having nothing to do with it. And it just seemed like some of these adults were just so like, ugh, the Beatles, and it is so annoying. But some of these adults really got it. Leonard Bernstein talks about it and he says, I'm not keeping my head in the dirt. I'm not an ostrich. You shouldn't be. These guys have something to tell the world. It was extremely poignant. I haven't heard him speak about the Beatles. So there's so much that I have to learn here. And I was just very thrilled with that. There's so much that went on in this documentary that I'm missing. It's an hour and 47 minutes. And yeah, like a lot of it's repetitive, but a lot of it is new. And like I said before, an interesting framing of a situation that most Beatle fans feel like they know in and out. So if you're willing to go in with an open mind and see things a little bit differently, especially if you're a younger fan, because I do once again think that the older fans might be like, good God, I lived this shit. It's something that we can really learn from, glean more information about culture from. It's an enjoyable watch. By the way, now that I have finally finished this video, which I am just dragging my ass getting this through. This whole thing has been a slog. It's not because of the subject matter, it's just because I've been so sick. I am going to get working again on my White Album video. Working again is kind of funny because the script as of right now is 104 pages. So, and it's only going to get a little bit longer. I expect the video to be somewhere between 5 and 7 hours. I want to be realistic about it, but it's going to be between 5 and 7 hours. I'm not splitting it up into 2 parts. I'm not splitting it up into any parts. It is going to be 1 part. You're just going to have to come back, pause it, come back. I'm in a better headspace to deal with it now, and I'm excited about it. And I don't know how long it's going to be between the next upload. I might put in a couple of little videos between here and there, but that's coming up next. So yeah, I'm excited about it, nervous about it, and I really hope that for the White Album video, you guys will show up for me because it has really become a passion project. Would I say that it's like the lost video? In a way, yeah. I mean, nothing is the lost video, but in a way, yeah. So I really, really, really am peer pressuring you to watch, or at least click on like and subscribe, but click on and like the White Album video when that comes out. Please. And like this video. And comment if you're nasty. All right, I gotta go. Like, subscribe, comment. Consider supporting me on Patreon where I do semi-weekly song breakdowns of Beatles music and have plenty of extra bonus footage, content, all kinds of stuff that I can't show you here. And I
Love y'all so much. And y'all come back now, you hear? Bye.
My sweet Lord. My Lord. My Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord. My sweet Lord.